everybody. Now we're going to take this final gather render one step further and actually introduce an image in the background. And we're going to use the ambient color of that image to actually cast colors upon our object itself. Now in the previous lesson, we discovered how to use an MIA Material X. We discovered how to utilize the MIA Material X's presets in order to best give us a starting point for a material. And we went ahead and made a image-based lighting dome that uses a texture that reacts to final gather. So now we're going to use something called HDRI. So initially when we built this dome, we had the type set to image. Now to get the proper image, you have to have the proper quality to the image. Now we could enter any image in here that we'd like. I could enter an image of my vacation photo. Bottom line is, you want something of high quality. So we're going to look up HDRIs. HDRI are really nice imagery because HDRI will actually utilize super high res ambient light or colors in the image itself and create some great process. So if you type HDRI free, what you're going to get is a bunch of free websites. I use this IBL archive quite frequently. They have, I think, the best free ones out there, at least the most definite availability of different resources. And you can see they're quite large files. They're not, that small. So let's get something that's nice and bright. Let's see. This one's nice. It has a pretty defined light source in the back. So Mon Valley Dirt Road. Go ahead and pick the one that you'd like. Each of these are going to have their own different kind of feel to them. So we're going to run through this a little bit. And I got about 3, 2, 1. That's going to go on my desktop. And I'm going to unpackage that. Let's look at what we have. I like this site because they give you not only the high-res HDRI image, but they also give you a smaller, in this case it's actually larger, but it's a JPEG, the JPEG file. They give you a blurred environment, which is really nice, so in case you want to blur it. And then you have some thumbnails and such that you can use. So all of these can be used within Maya. What we're really going to do is keep it down and dirty and basic. And in image name, all I'm going to do is simply go to my desktop, find my dirt road, and I'm going to load that 3K texture. And there it is. Now, I can rotate my element here. So if I want the sun to appear like it's coming from in front, I think that's probably the best spot right there. I can do so. So now let's see what we have. Using the same settings that we used in Final Gather, we're going to go ahead and render out our scene. Now, immediately HDRI takes longer. One of the main reasons is it's actually building reflections from the dome itself within all of our specular shaders. Now, if we had shaders that did not have reflections, this would go quite fast. Now, what you're going to see here, and you can kind of get a sneak peek, is that glazed material that you thought looked really good on the ceramic material originally now looks even better, because now we actually have some live action reflection and refraction response to it, which is giving it the illusion of reality. Now, some of you may be saying as well that, what about that desert background? Well, we're going to get rid of that in a second too, and we're going to be able to I'll show you kind of how to get it out of there. So again, we could up our Final Gather settings, but overall, this is actually a pretty nice render. Again, if you're trying to render something for print, or if you're rendering something to display on a website to show off, the topology or the model itself, this would be a really nice way to go about it. So we're going to give it a few minutes here, and this is going to take roughly that. This is going, it definitely processes a lot of the ins and outs, and you want it to do that. You want it to deal with the bending and the refracting of light within the model itself, the distortion that it allows. I mean, look at these lovely colors that we're getting on the ground plane. Now, not all HDRI images are equal in what they do. Just be aware, sometimes they're too dark, which we'll play with in a second. Let's go ahead and let's save this image. And I'm going to save this to my desktop as a targa. And there's a very important reason I'm using a targa, because targas contain alpha channels. and I'll call this picture render. There it is. Now, the reason that I did that as a target is because in Photoshop, this background will not be apparent, and that's going to help me in my final composition of this scene. All right, now if this was too dark for you or too light for you, how you work this is you go down to your advanced options, and you can kind of actually go down to render stats. If you go all the way down to render stats, you can actually adjust how bright the environment is, and you can adjust how bright the final gather effect is. So once you check this adjust environment effects or adjust final gather, this one affects just the picture and not the render. So if the picture is too bright but you like the render, this one is the dimmer switch for the final gather. So if I take it really low, it's going to be a lot darker and more menacing image. Let's go and look at this picture in more detail, and let's open this up in Adobe Photoshop. And the reason I use a targa is because it gives me more control of the background. I may like the idea of the canyons and the reflections and whatnot, but I may not like this idea of a background. So when I go into my file, I open that TGA file up. In the channels box, I actually get a target that is perfectly masking out the background. I command and I click on the box itself, not on the name, but on the box, and I go, then I click on RGB. And then I can go into here and I can add a layer mask. And then I can put whatever color I choose that fits in the background. This may be something where I just simply mount it or mat it out with a straight color. I may use I may hit it with an FX mode and do a gradient overlay, and those colors are way off, but we'll kind of play with these. So I may hit it with that, and it's really up to you guys. Again, we can reverse it and have like a really nice sense of light and glow back here. And I think this is a great method in presenting your artwork. And it doesn't really affect real time as much, because again, when I pull this model in, the game engine will deal with the lighting. The game engine will process elements like this. We'll build lights in the game engine and whatnot. But what you can do is really present your work at a professional or in a professional way. So that's kind of the down and dirty actually of HDRI. Now we can take it a step further, just like we did the final gather, and we can actually, let me kind of adjust these settings here. We can actually emit light from that, and that's going to take a while to render. So I'll go ahead and hit render just to show you what it does. But you'll notice that it's going to really have fine-tuned dots like the other render, and it's going to go through the process, and hopefully when I hit emit light, it kind of casts some shadows as well. And we can't really see them as much on here because this light is pretty uniform, and I actually put the sunlight in front, so the shadow that's casted is probably behind the object itself. It's not as pixely as the final gather method, but you can definitely see some artifacting that we would have to go in and change. So I'm going to hit escape here just to escape this render. At any point when you're using these, feel free and don't be shy. Go ahead and rotate your globes. So if we want the light to be in the background here and we want it to kind of cast down, I can hit 7 on my keyboard, which doesn't really work as much in this one. Let's go back to that. Let's hit render again, and let's see what this kind of brings to the table now. So again, the brightest part of that image was the sun, and that's going to definitely give us a position of shadows and whatnot. So what we see here is we see some of the light giving another maybe a highlight here. We have a bit of shadow behind here. It's a nice fill light overall, but it really defines the model itself. So feel free to use these. I mean, again, on that website you have hundreds of examples that you can choose from, and they're all free. I tend to not use them as my background, but they're royalty free in the sense of if they show up in your reflections, you won't get in trouble. So that's the long and the short of our lesson with this today. Hopefully you guys can apply these to your models and really get some great presentation pieces for your future portfolios.